Next up, we have Martin. Martin is the co-initiator of Coordination Network and the founder of Lateral.io. Martin has also been one of sort of our long-standing friends at Molecule. We've worked a lot together. Martin actually has been in the space for ages now, actually. You're an old cap at this point. But yeah, he's going to be here talking about how AI can help researchers. Awesome.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I anticipated that Sean was going to do a great job of introducing kind of some of the latest developments in AI and science, which is great because that tees me up for what I want to talk to you about today. So the topic that I want to talk about is kind of zooming out a little bit. So if we have these new AI scientists that can move a lot faster, Sean didn't directly mention this, but like with AI co-scientist, it was basically an 1800x speed up to arrive at a hypothesis. It's pretty dramatic. And so what I want to talk to you about today is what does that mean when we're then saying what futures we want to build, and how does on-chain infrastructure allow us to provide one of the most exciting opportunities for society to actually participate in this future and help decide on what futures we want to see. So that's why I called the talk Paths to Prosperity, because this is really an opportunity to introduce a new infrastructure layer for society to really harness this AI acceleration towards outcomes that we want to see. And I mentioned responsibly scaling them because the default outcome of these new capabilities is not necessarily an optimistic one, because there's the centralized dystopian future path that can also be taken, so that's just something to keep in mind. And the way that I want to frame this is essentially around, many of you, if you're familiar with the Ethereum ecosystem and so on, you've probably heard of this concept of onboarding the next billion. Now I think in terms of this intersection that Sean also mentioned of AI, on-chain infra, and science, it really is right now the opportunity to present a pathway that could truly onboard the entire planet. And that can sound crazy, but I'll get into why we've actually made progress towards that. And the narrative behind that is really how do we maximize the societal benefit of AI-accelerated science? A lot of what I think brought people into DeSci was frustration over misaligned incentives and a lot of things getting in the way of scientific progress. And I think now the interesting thing is that AI basically provides you could say a kind of wedge to introduce why things should be done in a new way that opens up new doors, which I think is very exciting. So what we've been doing at the Coordination Network is essentially looking at how can we help provide tooling on maximally open source principles that will help people steer these new AI science swarms essentially towards outcomes that we want to see, and how do we provide people ways to participate in that future. And doing so in a way that is aligned with new funding mechanisms that can very well leverage on-chain capabilities. And so the first piece of that is how do we get shared context? Science is very complicated. The next level of science is even more complicated because it requires interdisciplinary understanding. And then there's the question of, within science, there's usually only a handful of people within each domain that has like truly expert level knowledge. So how do we scale the availability of that expertise? And then how do we do that in a way that can be compatible with new funding mechanisms that will allow us to move at the pace that basically AI now offers? And central to our approach is essentially this idea of individual agency, where we want this world to exist where each of us can participate and have choice of how to participate, rather than being dictated to by a centralized model, for example. And so everything we do is also open source, because we see that as essential for being able to distribute access as widely as possible. And getting back to the 8 billion point, or 7 billion point, depending on how you cut it, what's exciting is we're now already then in a process of onboarding stakeholders from across the ecosystem, both frontier organizations within, for example, DeSci, but also more traditional funding agencies from countries and private companies doing R&D. So what we've seen is by taking this approach, we're actually able to start connecting these different groups in an ecosystem on these principles. So this is very exciting, and it shows that there's actually traction towards this future. So how did we get here? As many of you here know, we've been working towards this over time, over the past 3 years or so, because 3 years ago we basically saw these trajectories converging, and the approach that we took was understanding kind of what is the pathway of going from an idea to an outcome, what are all the steps involved, and learning from domain experts kind of how they approach this today, and then understanding how much of this could be automated. So to the scaling expertise piece, this was really around getting a sense of where are we today and what are the pieces that we need to get in place so that we can fully realize this acceleration effect. And we're super proud to have worked with so many people from the DeSci ecosystem in this process, alongside some more traditional organizations. And for example, the Foresight Institute for the past 4 decades have been building communities around frontier technologies. And they're an interesting example of kind of this AI effect taking shape, because they've spent 4 decades building communities around things around nanotech, around longevity, around neurotech, and now all of it is kind of moving into a next level of readiness. So it's interesting just to see those communities move into a new stage of, let's say, productionizing a lot of theory that's been going for a while. And so what that leaves us with is we're now in this point where we're catalyzing this multidisciplinary expert network. We have this library of verified scientific skills, and we're now moving into looking at how to introduce the programmatic incentive systems that we've had in the back of our mind throughout this journey. And as I mentioned, we're now also onboarding then more traditional funders into this space. And I really want to emphasize that point because yes, we've been on this journey for about 3 years, and we're now talking to nation states. And that timeline is kind of wild, and it is enabled because of this, the effect that AI has on everyone right now, where they're like, how are we going to handle this? And I think this community has a chance to offer a pathway that is deeply value aligned with a lot of countries. So the Overton window has shifted is basically the key thing to bear in mind here. And it opens up for new ways to do things at a level that I haven't seen in being in this space for over a decade. So to give you a little bit more, give you a bit more concrete idea of what this looks like, one of the projects we've been working closely with the Foresight Institute on is tech trees. And this gets to this question of basically, if you have thousands, tens of thousands, millions, billions of these agents that are out there to be able to do what you want, how do we collectively say what we want? How do we speak to these systems? And tech trees are one way of articulating goals and getting consensus on pathways to take and allocating resources. So just simply breaking down a tech tree, essentially, if you've played video games, you might be familiar with the concept, but essentially in this context, it lets you take a long-term goal, break it into the necessary technical capabilities of achieving it, understanding what the open challenges are to achieving those technical capabilities, and then identifying potential solutions for those challenges. And this breakdown already shows you how quickly that expands if you try to go down one of these trees. And so this is just to say that doing this manually traditionally would take weeks or months. It basically is a non-starter to use it on an ongoing basis. But you can imagine if you're using AI tools to build these, you can reduce that time significantly, and I'll show you in a second how. And the great thing is that if you have these, you basically can capture complex pathways, and then you can consider allocating funding to different parts of them. And you could have on-chain mechanisms for pooling funds towards different outcomes that you might want to collectively see. They could be on the technologies themselves, they could be on challenges. And so this is giving you a new digital artifact for articulating these complex outcomes that you want to be able to move towards. And what we're now doing is working with different organizations to help them build these tech trees for their goals and adapting them to their requirements, and then being able to even have tech trees speak to each other, essentially. And so, as I mentioned, building one of those would take a lot of time. And so what we do now is basically the Coordination Network platform gives you a set of building blocks to be able to create automated workflows to help you build these type of things in a way that is verifiable and auditable. And so what that looks like, basically, if anyone is familiar with LLMs or chaining LLMs, it's really a visual workflow of saying, you know, you have some input, you have a way of analyzing that, you get a response, you take it to a secondary input, and so on. And so these skills are ways for any scientist or any funder to be able to externalize their expertise into an automated workflow that is reproducible, verifiable, and so on. And you can plug them into any type of agentic system that you have. And so you basically start building up an externalized library of your skills that can be run and rerun and so on. And so combining those two pieces, if the video shows, yeah, here we go. This then is a video example of running one of these skills to create a tech tree. So that's combining the two. Assuming I'm able to show that video, which may be, are you able to launch this video? Let's see. If not, come to me later. It might have converted into an image. Okay. Looks like it's converted into an image. So anyway, then I'll explain to you what happens in this video. It will show you essentially that that skill creates something like this in about a few minutes. And so the point being that you're able to use these tools to very quickly create these things in a way that used to take months. And so taking all of those pieces together, this means that you basically have a way to externalize from your mind your skills into agentic workflows that you can trust and verify. And what does that mean? Well, if you have agents, that can scale extremely quickly. And this means every scientist, as Sean mentioned, can have these agents and basically have thousands of these agents supporting their work. And this then opens up a new question as well, which is if you have these systems, how do you start having dialogues with them as well? So what we're excited, and this will be on a panel later as well, where we'll be discussing this, is we've collaborated with Beard, who you'll be hearing from later on the panel as well, on what is a UI that would let humans, augmented with these skills, interact with fully autonomous scientific systems. And the UI we came up with was a social app. And so what's quite funny about that is that it's a UI that everyone is familiar with. Everyone is used to scrolling feeds. Now we can have that feed be populated with hypotheses coming from these agents, and you can basically say, you know, you can make comments on it, you can like it, you can say it's bullshit, there's literally a bullshit icon, and you can say, I want to fund this. And so it's really working on what is the UIs for being able to interact with these systems that familiarize them to a broader audience. So we're excited to start testing and rolling this out as well, and creating this ecosystem essentially where we can interact in this way. So I'm going to jump over the videos because they have been converted into images. And I'll leave you basically with this higher level view. So with these open source principles, we now have the opportunity to basically generate maps of what we want to achieve that then dictates different steps that need to be achieved along the way. Those can be basically presented to swarms of agents that allow us to move as fast as possible to achieve them. And the beauty is, re-emphasizing, is that if you do this on open source principles, all of that data can be in a composable environment where every step feeds into systems to optimize the models that then improves the overall system. So you get these extremely virtuous feedback loops that is then in a fully open, accessible ecosystem where anyone with access to the internet can have a pathway to participate because the system itself can help you understand what you need to understand to participate. So this is truly a civilizational scale upgrade to how we do science on open source principles. And if you're working, you know, in incentives, as a lot of the on-chain community does, it is the perfect environment to basically look at how do we set up the pools of funding to distribute across these systems, and how do we get consensus on it? You know, what are the governance mechanisms that allow us to move as quickly as this will allow? And so this is really, I think, what if you're interested in any of those pieces, please come talk to me because that's what we love to help facilitate. And on that note, that's where I want to reemphasize as well. We're onboarding basically people from different stakeholders groups, which represents in excess conservatively of $1 billion annually of early stage R&D funding and represent over 200 million citizens of the planet. So back to that 7 billion point, while 200 million is not yet 7 billion, this is like very real now. And so all I want to leave you with is that like from 3 years ago to now, we're in a point where the timing, the Overton window is there for this to get adopted at a scale where the permissionless and open source principles that this community stands for means that this is possible. And I just want to emphasize that that is crazy in terms of like the things that have to align for that all to be in a moment in time where this can happen is something that I would just leave you with to say, get involved now to like make this future happen, because this gives us the best opportunity to have a positive pluralist future where we can all thrive versus a dystopian plutocracy. So I'll leave you with that. If you want to get involved, you can go to coordination.network, and there's different ways to get involved in using the tool, building the tool, and funding the tool. So thank you very much for listening, and yeah, enjoy the day.